Good evening. Can you hear me? All right, great. Well, I'm so pleased to hear that this event was sold out and have this opportunity to share with you information about some specific grant programs like the Small Business Innovation Research Program and Small Business Technology Transfer Program. It's something I've had a passion for many years. Just curious before I start here, have any of you received SBIR or STTR funding? Anybody in the audience? Well, good. How about anybody who's applied in the past or is currently applying, looking to apply? Okay, a few more hands there looking to go after it. Great. Well, my background is, I've spent about 15 years as a Small Business Development Center director too, and one of the things that we always see, we have clients coming in all the time looking for money, and they usually ask, are there grants available? And generally the answer we tell them is no. If you're a for-profit business, there's no grants available. There's loans you can apply for, you have to qualify and pay back, or you have to give up equity to get some funding. But these programs to talk about tonight are going to, basically that's an exception to that rule. It's actually money you do not have to pay back, and you don't have to give any equity in your company. So I've been a big fan of the program for a long time. I was first exposed to the SBIR program almost 20 years ago now. Back in 1995, I used to be an aerospace engineer down in Southern California. I got laid off in the early 90s after we won the Cold War. We didn't need any more nuclear missile systems. And I ended up in a position as the manager of the business incubator, the Inland Empire Business Incubator, which was located at Norton Air Force Base, which had closed down. But we had a whole lot of these laid off engineers who were in the area at the time. And our first tenant, actually, in the incubator was a real bright guy from Caltech. He was also a TRW engineer where I'd worked. And he had just received his Phase 1 award with the Army White Sands Test Range. And he only had like 2 or 3 people on his team at the time. And they were developing software for when you shoot down a missile or a plane, where does the debris fall, so you can calculate kind of that free fly zone. So he moved in as our first tenant. And I helped him write his Phase 2 application. I'll talk about the different phases here in a minute, what they are. But I remember one thing too, we all had our top secret clearances dealing with nuclear weapon systems, and he had some secret data that he was dealing with in this program as well. And I remember we had to move in this huge safe into the incubator so we could store all these documents for his project there. But he ended up getting his Phase 2, and he was our first graduate out of the incubator. And he went on, got several more SBIR awards, and he grew his company to 90 plus employees, had offices around the world. So it really helped him launch his company at the time. And then I moved up here in 1997 to take the director position at the Napa Valley College Small Business Development Center. And I continued to do some training and counseling around helping people go after SBIR, STTR funding. And I remember one of the first trainings we did, it was a 2.5 day training. The first day we did kind of a full day proposal writing workshop, and we brought out a professional trainer for that. Second day was kind of on the cost proposal, how do you, it's government contracting you're doing. And then we had a half day with the tech transfer folks from like UC Berkeley and UC Davis who were there. But in that 2.5 day training, we had a couple that attended, and he was a PhD. He worked at Day Laboratories there in Napa Valley, and they ended up submitting and getting a Phase 1 award with NIH for $110,000 after going through our training. They were developing this patch you put on your skin that detect alcohol levels, and it changed color. So they got $110,000 Phase 1. Went on to get their Phase 2 award, and then they quit the jobs basically and launched their company. So I've seen that kind of over and over again where very small companies, one person, a couple people, have been able to get funding to basically launch their companies. Now, a little bit more too on kind of my background. After helping a lot of people through the process for many years, I kind of get the itch to do it myself as well. So in 2005, I actually formed a Optima Development Corporation. I'll show you. Optima Development Corporation, and we went after and we secured a $100,000 NSF Phase 1 award, and then we got a Phase 2 for $500,000, and then what's called a Phase 2 CC, another grant on top of that. Ours was actually what's called a Small Business Technology Transfer Grant, which I'll explain a little bit here, but we were actually transferring a technology out of the University of Utah. They had patented rapid prototyping technology. Most of you are probably familiar with that, 3D printing, where you have real thin layers that you build up a object, and it takes a long time to do it when you're doing thin layers, and you're limited to less than a meter in size typically. So ours is a concept was a thick layer manufacturing. Basically, we're using thick layers, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches thick. And we had a 4-axis water jet that would cut out each layer, and it was contoured so the edges would follow the shape of the object, and we just laminate them together. And you can see here we actually can create objects the size of a house from a 3D CAD model. So like this CAD model of a Buddha, we built this 25-foot tall Buddha out of layers of foam that were cut. And you can see Dr. Thomas, my co-PI, is standing there. The picture going to give you the scale of that. That's actually down in Santa Cruz now. It's all spray painted gold. It's in a temple down there. I went down to see it. But there's not a big market for 25-foot Buddhas. So our idea was to apply it to the construction industry. So in Phase 1, we built a full-scale curved staircase based on a CAD model that a company out of Georgia provided, a Southern Staircase. They build like 1,000 staircases a year. So we built them a prototype. We crated it up, flew it out there, and showed how we can assemble a staircase in a couple hours for them. And then we also built a 1/12 scale model of my house in Green Valley here in Phase 1. And then Phase 2, we went on and actually built a full-scale structure using what's called autoclave aerated concrete. So you learn a lot by doing it too. I've been helping people for years, but actually doing it is where you learn a lot of this. Now the mission or purpose of the SBIR program, you see to promote technological innovation and economic growth through the investment of federal research funds and small businesses. So it's got several goals here. Basically the idea is to try to tap into small businesses to help solve some of the problems and research problems that the federal government is looking to solve. And there's a lot, small businesses are definitely very innovative compared to a lot of big companies, I would say. So that's the main purpose of the program, and trying to commercialize the technologies. There's a big emphasis now on commercialization. When the program started in the mid-'80s, it was more on research and development. Now there's a very heavy focus on, they want to see that you actually commercialize whatever you're doing with that technology. And another thing I should mention on the purpose of that, and this is a key point you want to remember, is the purpose of the program is to fund cutting-edge R&D that has some degree of risk to it. So, in other words, they want to see that you haven't already demonstrated or proven feasibility of whatever it is you're trying to do. So they're not looking to fund straightforward engineering work, manufacturing, marketing activities, those type of things. So it's R&D that has some degree of risk to it. So that's something to keep in mind to figure out whether it's a fit for what you're doing with your company. So sometimes you might be too far along, and maybe it's not a good fit for what you're looking to get funded. So you're trying to bridge this chasm, get over this valley of death, and on the left-hand side you might have, there's a lot of federal research around basic research going on. And this would probably be more in the applied research area, trying to get to the commercialization, trying to cross that chasm, basically. Now, there's 11 federal agencies that are participating in the program. And Congress requires agencies with a certain size extramural budget to actually allocate. It started out about 2.5%, and it's going up every year. It's going to be capped about 3.2%, I think, in 2017, that they have to set aside and allocate for this program. So it's basically set aside for small business to apply for this R&D work. And you see here the 5 largest agencies also do what's called the STTR program, and I'll explain that in a minute as well. Now this slide I think is kind of interesting because it kind of shows you this pie chart of where the money goes as far as the different agencies. So if you see that you know, the DoD has kind of the lion's share of the funding, it's almost half the funding, and then NIH has you know, a little over a quarter, and then you look at that last quarter, that's the other 9 agencies, basically, all those other slivers. So the DoD and NIH are definitely the big funders for this, and that's something to keep in mind when you're going for funding. Which agency do you want to try to target? And I usually say, you know, search all the agencies. As DoD, for example, you know, funds breast cancer research. So you don't want to look just at NIH. You might look at DoD as well for some funding. The other interesting thing, you see that the green and blue here, they have what's called contracting agencies and granting agencies, and there's some kind of key differences for them. So the contracting agencies like the DoD or NASA, they have a problem they're looking to solve. So they have very specific topics that they're looking to fund, and they propose a problem, you propose a solution. So their topics are very specific. They give you the specifications for what they want you to do in phase 1 or phase 2. You know, maybe the DoD needs some new tank tread or something, so you have to solve that problem. And they also want you to show that there's maybe another commercial application, you know, outside of, you know, solving their problem as well. So when you do a search, there are very specific topics for the contracting agencies, and it's actually a contract versus grant. It's money you don't have to pay back, but it's just like a grant. In the granting agencies, they have very broad topics. So you can typically try to find something you can fit under, like NSF or NIH. NIH actually does both granting and contracts. The majority is probably granting that they do. But these are broader topics, so you propose both the problem and the solution in that case for the granting agencies. So that's some key differences. There's a little bit as far as, you know, contracting too, as far as how you deal with it. You know, contracting, you're dealing with, you know, government procurement, and even with the granting as well. So who can participate? So to be eligible, you have to, first of all, be a for-profit business, and you have to be, you know, 51% owned by a U.S. citizen or permanent resident alien. And now with the reauthorization of the program that happened here in 2013, they're allowing VC-backed firms to actually be eligible. There was a lot of, I guess, going back and forth on whether they wanted to have that, particularly with like the NIH type companies. But they've decided to allow some of this to be VC funded. And the concern would be that, you know, right now it's very small companies that are getting the funding. I'll show you a chart in a minute. And the concern was, well, maybe it's going to crowd out some of the smaller companies, and then, you know, these companies have more resources to be able to go after. It's going to be a more competitive program. But it doesn't, now you don't get, it's not something you get ruled out for if you do have VC funding on it. And you do have to be a small business. Yes?
As you go along, could you elaborate a little bit on the abbreviations?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So this first one is just VCs, VC-funded organizations, and then we got hedge funds, and then private equity funds, PEF there. So it's basically, you could have any of those funding your company. And then the next PI stands for Principal Investigator. Sort of spelled that out there, but the Principal Investigator has to be primarily employed by the small business. And that's a challenge sometimes too. That basically what that means is you can't work more than 49% somewhere else. So when I had my phase 1 and phase 2, I had to negotiate. I was director of the SBDC at the time. I had to negotiate to drop down to 49% time with my position there to be able to work on these projects, because I was the PI on phase 1 at least for my project. Now you don't have to have a PhD or anything to be a PI. You know, they do look at your credentials. They want to see if someone can manage the research effort, but also you're basically the project manager. Someone can manage the whole project. In my case, I just have a BS in engineering and an MBA, but I was the PI on our project. And the research has to be done in the U.S. Typically, there's a few exceptions to that. I had one client that was doing an NIH grant that they were using a snake venom for some sort of heart medication, and the major research was being done by a university down in South America, so they were applied to get some permission to do some of the research outside of the U.S. but you do have to get approval for that. This chart that I like to show is just kind of interesting that I mentioned a lot of it goes to the smaller companies. So you see, the 10 or fewer employees is where the majority of these awards are going to. And a lot of them are, first-time award winners. So it's not a rigged program. You can get in there and get funded. It's not the same people necessarily getting funding. There has been a concern with what they call SBIR mills, where those people get 20 or 30, SBIR awards. But now with the emphasis on commercialization, they're trying to stay away from that. And you actually have to show your commercialization track record to be able to, once you get to a point of, you have 20 SBIRs, you have to start to show that you've actually taken things and got them commercialized. And they actually look at the conversion rate too from phase 1 to phase 2. And that was all new with the reauthorization. This just shows that it's primarily small companies. Like I mentioned, most of the clients I work with are 2 or 3 people, or start with 1 person initially. So there's over $2.5 billion a year with the 11 agencies, and the way they dole the funding out is there's basically 3 phases. So phase 1 typically is $150,000. It depends on the agency. Some it can be less, some it could be a little more. The reauthorization allows them to go up to 150% over the cap. So like with NIH, you can go to 225. NSF still stays at 150. Some of the smaller agencies might use a smaller amount, like $80,000. And phase 1 is typically a 6-month effort. And that's where you're demonstrating or proving the feasibility of whatever your new innovation or technology is. So that might be a report, it might be a benchtop prototype that you're doing. Phase 2 then is where the real money's at, and again, that's up to typically $1 million for most of the agencies, or NSF is still at $750. That is a 2-year award, and that's usually where maybe you develop a field prototype of whatever you're continuing the R&D effort from phase 1. And then phase 3 is commercialization. And there's no direct money through the SBIR STTR program for phase 3. So that's where you have to go out and find angel investor or VC or partners or help you fund the phase 3 or customers at that point in time. Now, some of the agencies, like the contracting agencies like DOD or NASA, they could be your phase 3 customer. And you can actually be a sole source provider if you go through the phase 1, phase 2 for that, you're solving their particular problem. Yes.
I don't know if you got to cover, but can you jump the stage or you got to follow?
Yeah, okay, yeah. It used to be you had to always go through phase 1 first before you go to phase 2. And some of the agencies you had to be invited, like DOD, you had to be invited to submit for phase 2. But with the reauthorization in 2013, they actually allow direct to phase 2 for just a few of the agencies. Some like NIH can do it, DOD, NSF, you still have to go through phase 1 before you go to phase 2. Some of them also had what they call fast track, where you apply for like phase 1 and phase 2 at the same time. So it's possible you could apply to phase 2 directly, or you could do a fast track, but you'd have to show that you've already completed all the phase 1 work and demonstrated feasibility. So it's tough route to go. You have to have a lot of good preliminary data to do that. I think I've had 1 client that wanted to go direct to phase 2, and I've had a couple that try to do fast track and they haven't been successful. It's a little more challenging route to go. Now, as far as the odds of being funded, it's not too bad. Compared to VC funding, I guess about 1 out of 8 to 1 out of 12 phase 1s get funded. And then once you get through phase 1, about 1 out of 2 to 1 out of 3 get funded for phase 2. Now, phase 2 is a lot more competition because you're competing against people who've already won a phase 1 award. Phase, typically, it depends on the topic. Each agency, maybe they could fund, I don't know, even 12 phase 1s or something. Maybe they fund 3 phase 2s or whatever. So they might down select to 1 or 2 phase 2s, or maybe they fund 3 phase 1s and they only select 1 phase 2. So there's different funding for each topic. And I don't have a lot of good statistics for phase 3, but this is numbers I've heard, about 1 in 20, which is only 5%. So this is where the program really falls down, is getting from phase 2 to phase 3, which is the commercialization. So that's where a lot of effort now is with the agencies to provide additional assistance with the commercialization part of it. And that's where Tech Futures Group, we can help out, hopefully, to make it from that phase 2 to phase 3 with commercialization. Just want to hit real quickly a couple of differences between the SBIR, which is Small Business Innovation Research, and STTR, which stands for Small Business Technology Transfer. One of the differences is for phase one, for SBIR, the small business has to do at least 2/3 of the work. And then you're allowed to contract out another third to, say, a research university or a federal lab. You don't have to, you're not required to, but you could contract out another third, and then it's 50% for phase two. Now for STTR, which is like what I had at the University of Utah, the small business has to do at least 40% of the work. And then you're required to contract with 30% with a research institution or a federal lab. And then the last 30% you could either keep or you could contract that out as well. And there's certain like federal labs, the ones that are what we call the federal research labs that are federally funded development centers, they have what they call GOCO and GOGO. So GOGO is government-owned, government-operated. GOCO is government-owned, contractor-operated. So the GOCOs are eligible to be partners with the STTR. And one other difference, I mentioned the principal investigator earlier. You have to be primarily employed, 50% at least, or you can't work more than 49% somewhere else. For SBIR, that's pretty much the case for all agencies. Now STTR, you could potentially have your principal investigator at the research institution. For some of them, NSF doesn't allow that. Like in my case, I had to be the PI on my NSF grant. This is a challenge though, because trying to convince somebody to take on a 6-month effort to quit their job to be a principal investigator where there's no guarantee of a phase 2 following on, that's going to be challenging. Now, one of the first steps to figure out whether it's a good fit for you or if there's something that you can get funded through SBIR, STTR, is to do a search of topics. Yeah.
Quick question: how do they verify or validate 50%?
Yeah, and they use pretty much a 40-hour because you can't say that I work 80 hours a week. So it's kind of based on a 40-hour work week. So you can't be working somewhere else, more than 20 hours a week, basically.
You talk to my boss.
Yeah, yeah. Most people are already working that 80 hours a week anyway. Now you can't just submit a topic out of the blue. You have to find a topic you can fit under. So each one of the agencies, they do a solicitation between 1 to 3 times a year. So small agencies like EPA once a year. NSF is twice a year, so they do the first week of June, first week of December. NIH has 3 times a year. They have August 5th, April 5th, August 5th, December 5th. DOD also has them 3 times a year as well. So they put out the solicitation, and it's a couple months before the due date, and they list all the different topics. There's thousands of different topics that they're looking to fund. So that's one of the first steps. I'm going to show you there are a couple of websites where you can actually do a keyword search of all 11 agencies at one time to figure out what's being funded. And usually, after you find something that's a good fit, then you want to contact what's called a topic author or topic monitor, or the DOD calls it a TPOC. It's so they each have different names for who that topic author is, and you can contact them and say, "Is this a good fit for what you're looking to fund?" And so they might ask you to submit them an executive summary. Like NSF has a format. They say a 2-page executive summary to submit to them. Here's 2 websites. If I won't have time tonight, later on I can show you through them, but the SBIR.gov is the official one funded through the SBA, where you can search all the solicitations for the topics out there. Another one I like is zyn.com. It's run by a gentleman named Rick Schindel out of the Washington, Seattle area. And he used to run this site that was formerly like the SBIR.gov, but he's continued to update it. And he also has some other, I have a picture of the page. They have, if you look on the left, there's a link for like solicitation dates. You can see what the upcoming solicitation dates, and there's links directly to the agencies. And then you can do a search of both the open and closed topics. So open topics are the ones that currently have an open solicitation. And the closed ones will be patched. And I usually suggest searching both. So if you did a search on fuel cells, you might get 20 hits under open, and then you might get 150 under closed. But the closed will show you what they've funded in the past, because the topics don't change too much from year to year for solicitation to solicitation. So if you find a topic that has fit, step is to put together a proposal. And the typical phase 1 is 15 pages. I brought some sample ones along for phase 1, phase 2, if you guys want to take a look at them. It's 15 pages, but it actually ends up being 50 by the time you get all the resumes and budgets and all that. And phase 2 is probably closer to 100 pages. But this is a typical outline. I pulled the one for NSF, and you can see here what goes into it. You usually have a cover sheet, which is a form they provide you. Just fill it in. Project summary, which is 1 page, and then you have a project description. So that's the part where you have basically the 15 pages where you talk about. And what's interesting, you see NSF here is actually move the commercialization stuff up front, the market opportunity, the innovation, the company and team. That's all part of the commercialization part of it. And then they have the technical discussion later on. Before it used to be more up front, but there's a bigger emphasis now on the commercialization. But these are some suggested page counts. So the meat you see is kind of the technical discussion, the R&D plan. That should be at least 5 to 7 pages. That's the who, what, where, when, task 1.1, 1.2, and who's going to do it, where are you going to do it, that type of thing. You have references, resumes or biographical sketches, budgets that you put together, and then you also have to list any current grants you have or pending ones that you have applying for, facilities you're going to use, and then supplemental documents you can submit, for example, letters of support. You might get ones from customers or BCs or whatever that you can include with your application. So that's kind of a typical outline, what it looks like. And just want to show you the budget part of it. This is government contracting, so you have to break your budget down into direct costs, which are usually material and labor, and then indirect costs, which most small businesses aren't familiar with indirect. They don't have a federally negotiated indirect rate. But that's basically your cost for running your business. That's overhead for rent, utilities, insurance, that type of thing. Like UC Berkeley and Davis, theirs are, I think, 52, 53% indirect rate. So anytime they get a grant, half of it comes off of it to run the university. So if they're subcontracting with you on STTR, they take half off of their indirect rate. So that 33% that you give them on SBIR are really more like 15%. But, and then you're also allowed a profit, most agencies up to 7%. That can be used for anything. You can use it for patent expenses, you can use it for maybe you underestimate the direct cost, or you can buy a laptop or whatever it might be. So it's tough to buy like equipment in phase 1. Phase 2, you buy equipment if you can justify it. Submitting the proposal, most of them are all gone pretty much online now where you have to submit, and these are just some different websites. A lot of the agencies are going to grants.gov, but some of them have proprietary. NSF uses a fast lane system. DOD has their own system. And then there's also registrations like NIH has you do it with their ERA Commons. You have to register your company and the PI. So there's a lot of different registrations as well. And then with the reauthorization, you have to register with the SBA as well because they want to be able to track the results of the SBIR program. And then since it's government contracting, you have to go through all these steps of getting your EIN number, DUNS number, CAGE code, SAM, which is the System for Award Management. That's how they pay you. You put your bank account information in there, and that's how they're going to pay you on these. The nice thing, I think our next speaker will talk a little bit about the payment, but the cash flow was pretty good for phase 1. I think mine was at 100,000. I think I got around 60,000 initially, and then there's another payment, and then they withhold the final amount for your final report. And then phase 2 is split into about 4 equal payments, and then your final report. But one thing on this, don't wait till, I have clients that wait till 2 days before they're due. You can't get all this done, so you need to start doing this ahead of time. This is just what they're going to review the proposals with, and basically look at the scientific and technical merit. Is there a problem you're trying to solve? And then, what is the innovation, and then also the commercializations. That's a big part of it. NSF, you saw in that outline, is now 3 to 5 pages. It used to be 1 to 2 pages. I know of the phase 2 grant, we had to do a 15-page technical proposal, 15-page commercialization that was equally weighted for the commercialization part of it. And then they look at your team. As a team, the PI and anybody else, do they have the qualifications? And the budget. Does the budget match your work plan? Do you have too much work plan for too little budget, or the other way around? So they want to make sure that what you're proposing is reasonable. And the agencies, some of them have internal review panels and others external. The contracting agencies like DOD, they have usually internal. and they're required with the reauthorization to get the review done within 90 days. The ones that use external, like NIH and NSF, they don't have that requirement. So one of the downsides to the program is, I mentioned I'm a big fan of it, but I'll tell you the bad part of it, I guess, is say you applied for NSF, June 5th, and you won't hear till end of November if you get funding for phase 1. So you start maybe January of next year. You do your 6 months. Next year, you finish, June 30th, and then you submit your phase 2 next July. You wait another 6 months, and then you get your phase 2. So you're 3 years down the line. So you got these gaps in funding. That's the downside, I think, of the program. It takes a long time for them to go through it. They've come up with some different supplemental funding to help you get through, like the NSF has phase 1B. That's to cover the gap between phase 1 and phase 2. And then there's also matching funds like NSF and DOD and NIH and EPA. They have these phase 2B funding. They'll match a third-party investor, like NSF will match 50 cents on the dollar up to $1 million, so you can get additional $500,000 in funding. So once you get the phase 2 award, next week I might be able to talk to you, you open up all these other opportunities that you can go after as well for funding. Don't have too much time tonight, but there's other state matching programs too. California used to have a CalTIP, is a California Technology Investment Program. They would match, I think it's up to $250,000 phase 2. That's gone away. We're trying to get some efforts to get that coming back now. It was done through regional technology alliances. We used to have the Bay Area Regional Technology Alliance, and there's SARTA, Sacramento Area Regional Technology Alliance. But we're working with GoBiz, Governor's Office, to see if we can bring some of that back. I know like Kentucky will fund, they'll match 100% of phase 1, phase 2. Utah had a matching program too, so the state matching program. Other grants too, there could be, I've had some clients that have got funding like through the California Energy Commission. They have a small business program. Then we've had some clients that got funded through DOE Sunshot program too. So there's other opportunities. Now those other opportunities, remember we talked about that 3%. It might be that 97%, so then you're competing against research universities or nonprofits or bigger companies, so it is more competitive as well. And just to wrap up, so there's over $2.5 billion available every year. You have to show that you have some sort of innovative R&D. There's some degree of risk, so it's not something you've already done or proven, and it's not straightforward engineering. And the key to the success is you need to be responsive to the agency's needs. You need to solve their problem, and then also, so there's commercialization. And then, as I mentioned, the big part of your plan is your work plan. So you need to have enough detail so they can understand what you're doing, and then who the team is too. That's a real important part of putting the team together. So I'm going to turn it over to someone who's been there, done that as well. And I don't know, we're going to take questions now, or should I turn?
Let's do questions at the end.
Okay. Okay.
Nice round of applause for Chuck. Thanks very much.
Hey, thank you so much. Hey, but I want to start with a plug for actually Prashant and the Thai Launchpad, because I did all this SBIR stuff and did phase 1 and phase 2, and I didn't know about the TFG group until about a month ago. So, and actually, I think on the websites like in NSF, SBIR, I wish they would mention stuff like this, because that would have been probably very useful at the time. So anyway, okay, I'll tell you guys my story. Maybe I'll first tell you a little bit about the company, and then I'll tell you all the things that happened. And I took this thing from another slide, and it's got a lot of animation. It wasn't supposed to be this way. But anyway, the company that I did this SBIR with was called Cavisa, and we started in 2009. And it was a virtual desktop company. And at that time, there were two gorillas in the industry. It was VMware and Citrix, and they're still there. We came up with a different way of doing VDI. It was a distributed kind of an architecture. I would call it VDI-specific converged infrastructure. And it basically reduced the cost of virtual desktops by 2/3 and eliminated this complex SAN that you had to use to be able to do VDI. And so by doing that, we were able to actually create a virtual desktop that cost less than physical desktops. And as a result, it just took off. We made about 150 enterprise customers in just 3 quarters, and doing things like 5,000 desktop deployments. We had an OEM with Dell, and we won the best of VM World, best of Interop, best of C, but almost every, I think we're batting about 100%. Every conference we went to, we would get the best of. So it went really well, and eventually that Citrix acquired us in 2011. So that's Cavisa, that's the one we did this whole SBIR phase 1, phase 2 with. So let me tell you how that went. So we started in around 2009, actually just a little bit before 2009, and that was a very tough time to do startups and a very tough time to get money. And so we're thinking, how are we going to address that issue? And there was 2 of us at that time, and we thought, well, we started looking around and found out about this SBIR grants, and we looked at, I think Air Force, DoD, and so forth, and we weren't making tank treads and things like that. So it looked like NSF had some general ones about IT. And so it looked like what we were going to do fit. And at that time, you had to get permission from I think we were called program managers, from the program manager in order to be able to actually submit a proposal. So I sent him an email, and he set up a meeting, and he was a tough guy, but we gave him the proposal, and I thought he was going to say, hey, don't bother applying, but they said, no, I'll let you apply, go ahead. And then he wanted to know about our backgrounds, and we had a PhD from the University of Illinois, both of us. And then he asked us who our advisors were. I told him who our advisors were. He goes, okay, I know both of them. I said, I want you to go ahead and write the grant, but I don't want you to tell him anything about it. So what do you mean? We're going to use them as references. No, don't use them as references. Don't tell them. What I want from you guys is not an academic proposal. I want an actual business proposal with some technical meat in it. And so do it that way. And so that's how it began. And at the time that we called him, we had 2 weeks left in which to get it all done. So we worked really hard and got the thing in. And it was around December, January timeframe is when we finished the proposal and got it in. And made sure that time even the fast track stuff didn't work as well. There were some issues, and so you want to make sure if you do it, you don't want to do it on the day it's due, because everybody's trying to get it in there on the day it's due. So make sure you do it 2 days before. So I always do it that way, 2 days, and I keep the entire day free. So anyway, we got that in, and then comes the tough process, because you're waiting for 4 months before you hear back. And for some reason, mine took even longer, so I kind of gave up hope. And then eventually I got a call from Errol, who was the program manager, and gave me a hard time on the phone again. So why didn't you write it this way? Why didn't you write it that way? I said, oh, okay, it looks like I didn't get it. He goes, no, you got it. And so we got the proposal, we got approved, and I think it started on June or July. So you can see it was like a 6-month wait before the money came in. And at that time, the money was $100K for phase 1. Now it's $150K. So, and in fact, that was the last class, if you will, that got the $100K, which really bummed me. But anyway, so in June, July, we started. And as you can see, we, of course, doing a startup, we didn't actually sit on our hands for 6 months. We were actually working on it. And to be honest with you, I think about, 2/3 of it was done by the time the grant came in. And when the grant comes in, it's not like you get 100K, because I hadn't read all the stuff, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get 100K, I think I got 30K. And so what they do is they start you off with 30K, then you have to write an interim report, then you get the other 30K, and then when you write the final report, you get the rest of it. So that's how it works. And, give or take a few Ks here and there. So anyway, so we wrote that. It was kind of funny. I said, my God, we're almost done with it. But that actually made it easier in some ways, because we had actually more time for some areas that we weren't successful. We could do the experiments again and things of that sort. So we went ahead and did that. And also what we realized was that, given it was 100K and there's 2 of us, we thought, if we paid ourselves with this, and we had thought this thing before, so it was in our budget, it didn't make sense, because, 20, 30, 40% would go back to Uncle Sam. So I said, boy, that makes only about 60K. So we decided that we're just not going to take any money for ourselves, that we'd actually use it and hire contractors to do some of the work, and, let them pay Uncle Sam. And that actually worked out better. So we didn't take any of the money ourselves. And in our budget proposal, we made it very simple, 0 for the PI and 0 for my co-founder, and how much we're going to be paying the contractors. And that's kind of the approach we used. Anyway, to cut a long story short, so phase 1 is about 6 months. So come December of 2009, we have to write the final report. We write the final report, and that's when the phase 2 is also due, roughly around that time frame. So we wrote the phase 2, and then again, as Chuck pointed out, you have to wait 6 months. 4 months to see if you got approved, and then another 2 months before the money comes in. And so again, same thing happened, and again, we were very lucky, we were approved, and come July, we got 150K. At that time, again, it was 100K for phase one and 500 for phase two. Today for NSF, it's 150K phase one and 750K for phase two. It's almost a million, 900, almost a million. That's a decent amount of money. Anyway, so when that money came in, you get 150K to start, and then I think we had 5 sets of interim reports, and I believe it was 3 years, though you mentioned 2, so I may be wrong with my timeline here. But so you get that money over a 2-3 year period. So you can kind of add it all up. It's about 3 to 4 years, add up the money, and you can kind of say, well, this is the rate at which the money comes in. All right, so you should keep that in mind as you're kind of planning out how you're going to do this and how you're going to leverage this funding. As far as deliverables for us, it was interim reports and final reports and nothing else. There was nothing that we had to show. We have reports showing what kind of results we got, things of that sort. Nobody ever came to verify. But the other thing is that you do have to go to Washington every year for 2 days, and the funding for that comes out of the money that you received, where you meet all the other candidates and they talk to you about how you should commercialize. There's a real effort to commercialize. And it's interesting because some of the people we met had never talked to a single customer. We were quite the opposite. And because at some point during phase 2, what happened is that we were actually doing betas with customers, and the thing is that the money that you get is you can't use it for everything. You can't use it for sales. You can't use it for marketing. You can't use it typically for capital expenses, basically for engineering, and so we kept it that way. But the problem was that when we began to do these betas, we were flying here and there and working with customers, and I was like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. We should be able to pay for that because it wasn't a sales activity. So I called up the program manager. We talked to him and said, here's the issue, and he was great. So I think relationship with the program manager is very important. And he said, okay, write up everything you just told me because I have to cover my and so make sure that you have that, and then go ahead and you can charge certain amounts towards these kinds of expenses. So that was terrific. So that's how we kind of made it through those things. Of course, during this process, we also got funding and everything else, and now we had, this was an additional perk, if you will, and it was great to have it. So that's basically the story. A couple of things again is that if you look at the way that the money comes in, the gaps that are there, and the fact that it comes in installments, I really look at it as a great way to supplement an existing investment. So if you guys are doing it, if you have friends and family or seed, if you got 900K in seed and you get another 900K here, that's fantastic. Right? So that's the way I would look at it. Or the other way to look at it is that you're going to go into it, you need some money, to put food on the table. You're going to be going slow. There's only 1 or 2 of you, and this gives you something as opposed to nothing. And that's another way to look at it. And if you have at least a little bit of cash, then you could use it to bring in 2 or 3 or more people and have contractors, and therefore now you can actually accelerate the development. That's the other way in which I would look at it. Now remember, you have to be very careful because you can only really use it for the engineering and scientific efforts, not for anything else. I told you about maintaining a good relationship with the program manager. That's key, and the one we had was fantastic. He had done startups in the Valley, and so he kind of understood our how we work, and that made it a lot easier. Finally, I'd like to just give you another, just a little story, is that, as you can see, if you do the math, the fund I was still working with the NSF fund when we got acquired by Citrix. And so a couple of things happened. One was, if you've been acquired by a public company, it's a very painful process. You have to divulge everything, and I think when I was all done, it was like, well, this thick stack of paper, and of course we had to mention the fact that we had an NSF grant and how it happened. Every communication between me and NSF was in that stack of papers, and so of course eventually the lawyers came and said, Kumar, do you own full IP? Does the government own this IP at all? And I said, of course not. I said, can you prove it? I said, well, let me go look at the website. So I looked at the website, and everything that I can find, there's nothing there on IP. And I said, well, you better go talk to some officials at NSF and figure this out. So I said, okay, let me go do that. I called up the program manager and said, Errol, please tell me that you don't own any of the IP. And he goes, well, no, that's not exactly how it works. So it just so happens, and I don't remember the whole story, but for issues with respect to national security, the IP can be used by the U.S. government. And so he gave me a precedence. I said, oh, how often does this happen? And he told me that in one case, there was a company that had some night vision type technology that they had done through NSF SBIR. And after having done so, they went out of business. And I guess maybe US was finding somebody at night. They needed the night vision technology. And so they took that IP and gave it to another company that could produce that night vision device. And so I said, great, that's not the best news for me. And so I went back to the lawyers and I told them this is the situation. They said, well, let's go talk to the program manager. And so the program manager reiterated the story. And when it was over, I added in my bit, and I said, look, Citrix, you're Citrix, you've been doing virtual desktops for many, many years. You're not gonna go out of business. And if all of a sudden for national security, they need virtual desktops, you're gonna just make more money. So it should be okay, it's the US government. The lawyers weren't altogether pleased. But anyway, a week later, they came back and they decided it was fine because it was the US government. And so the acquisition went through. So that's something else to just keep in mind as a part of this aspect. And the final thing was that when it was all done, I went back to Errol and said, hey, look, now we're acquired, it's all over. And Errol goes, well, now you're a big company, you don't need the money anymore. And so whatever was still owed to you, we'll stop the payment. I said, no, Errol, you can't do that. Because when you get acquired, you give them a balance sheet. And I said, look, now that money's gonna come out of my personal pocket. So Errol said, okay, all right, we'll just leave it as it is. And well, you just have to keep filing those reports. And I also went back to Citrix and said, look, given all the work that we're doing at Citrix, if I fail to file these reports, there's this money that's going to be, that's not going to come in. What do you want to do? And I said, well, let's try to get those done. And if they don't, we'll eat it. So that was very nice of Citrix. I got all the reports done, by the way. So, and so anyway, that's my story on using an SBIR grant. Thank you.
That was fantastic, Kumar and Chuck and Jerry as well. Just a very quick round of applause for these guys. I mean, it's really good perspectives on both sides of the table here. So what we'll do is we'll open it up for questions from the audience here. And we won't have a roving mic, but I will repeat your question for the benefit of people who watch this later. So who's got a question? Gentleman in the back over there. So the question is, what happens if you have a very long sales cycle and the money is really going towards the technology but not sales? How do you deal with that? Any of you?
Well, yeah, in terms of just the SBIR, it's just a restriction. You can't use any of the funding for sales or marketing efforts. Now, they encourage you, they want you to go out and find customers and partners, so they're encouraging you to do that. It's just the actual funding that you're getting from the government for the SBIR has to be restricted to that R&D type work. And a lot of it might be a long sales cycle, and most SBIR projects really, you're getting seed funding to get this going. It's gonna be a long time before you actually have your phase 3 partners or customers in place. So I'm not quite sure your concern with the question was, but it's just a restriction as far as what you use the funding for. But they encourage it. They want to see commercialization, so that's what they want to see.
Another question over here? Yeah, sure. The question is, how long did it take to write the phase 1 proposal for Kumar?
Well, I had 2 weeks to do it, and I would say I spent the whole 2 weeks. And to be honest with you, I think the hardest part is to fit it into the categories that they want. Sometimes I felt my flow was different from the flow that they wanted, and that just made things very difficult. And I think the other difficult part is the part where you're writing the technology piece, the experiments, and you have to sit there and say, this is what you're going to do, these are the expected results, and just it's just very tedious and painful, but it's a process you have to go through. I would usually say 2 weeks, if not a month. It takes time.
Comment on that, Chief. Yeah, I would say, it's a couple month effort. I mean, you can actually do the writing maybe a week, but it's lining everything up too, like getting your letters of support, or if you're doing STTR, you have to get a cooperative research agreement put together with the university. So you need to start 2 or 3 months ahead of time. The actual writing, maybe you can do in a week. Because a lot of it you do custom cut and paste if you already have a business plan and other things for the commercialization section. But yeah, don't wait till the last week necessarily. Figure it a couple months.
So the question is, while you're waiting for the results of your application, the status, you're going to go out and try to raise other money from other folks, et cetera. And if you get that money, what happens to your original proposal?
Right. You're just not allowed to get funded for something you already did or paid to do work for. So if you've already completed that work, you can't apply to do that again. And it also applies, you can apply to more than one agency. For example, you can apply to DOD and NSF or NIH. Usually you have to disclose in your application you're applying to those different agencies. You just can't be funded by two agencies for the same thing. They don't want to have double dipping. Or if it's outside funding from somewhere else, you've already completed the work, then they're not going to want to fund something you've already completed. So that, you can't get get paid twice, that double dipping, I guess.
So just to repeat the question, who owns the IP in this process? And related to that is who actually learns about the IP in this process?
I'll start it off, and then you retain all worldwide patent rights to whatever you're developing, even though the federal government is funding it. Now, they do have what they call the march-in rights that he's talking about, where if there's a national emergency or something and you haven't commercialized it, they can either force you to or take it to someone else. Now, I have not seen that happen very much. I think it's a very rare occasion that happens, but you retain the worldwide patent rights. For the STTR, you have to put together a cooperative research agreement for the university, and that defines who's bringing what IP to the table, and then when you develop new IP, who's going to own that. So you have to negotiate that as a cooperative research agreement. And then, let's see, there's a third part of it too.
Who owns the IP, or who learns about the IP, who does it get disclosed to?
Yeah, so the actual proposal itself, you can mark it as proprietary. The only part you don't, that executive summary or one-page summary or abstract, that gets published. You don't want to put anything proprietary in there. But you can mark which sections you want to keep proprietary. And then the government actually, they don't release it, or they can't release it till I think it's 5 years after the completion of your, say, phase 2, I think it is. You might know more about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think actually the IP is quite well protected, except for the fact that I don't know what you just call it, the fact that again, if there's a national security issue or something, that the government has access to it. I think that's the main issue, and I just think that you guys should know that in the event of being acquired. We filed 2 patents. The patents are owned by us. So I think otherwise, and as you mentioned, you can actually say, hey, this is proprietary, and now therefore it's protected. And it's also you can also even specify who can or cannot review your proposal. So, for example, if you're in data management, you can say EMC and NetApp folks can't look at it.
So that actually brings up a good question, which wasn't touched on in the presentation. Who actually does review these proposals in the process?
Maybe you can talk more.
So it depends on the agency. DOD, it's usually internal, so they have project officers they're developing weapon systems. So they do these, they call them SBIRs actually instead of SBIR, they have a different terminology. But like NSF, they have an external review panel. It's typically 4 people. NIH has these study panels, they have it's external. So they pull together these people that are experts both on technical and then also commercial side of it to review them. And you don't know who you're going to get always too, and you're going to get different people. One thing I forgot to mention, that you might not be successful the first time around. In my case, I wasn't actually when I submitted. And then at the time, President Bush had executive order, they wanted more manufacturing topics. So I resubmitted, they had the same topic 6 months later. I took the review panel comments. So you always want to get the review panel comments, and they'll give you, in the case of NSF, it's, very good, fair, and usually you have to have 3 very goods and at least 1 good probably to get funded. But I was funded the second time around by using the comments from the review panel for the first time around.
And the external panel that reviews this, that can be from any industry, like you think you mentioned DMC, et cetera. I mean, would you know who this is?
No, you're not going to know who it is. You can, like you mentioned, you can exclude who you want to review it, and then for NIH, you can suggest what study panel you want to go to, but you don't know who it is. You're never going to see that. So you get the comments back there anonymous.
But you can tell sometimes because they'll make comments regarding their particular company's products.
Question in the front here. So if you have a provisional patent already, are you still allowed to go through the grant process?
No, you can apply. If you have a provisional patent, that's fine. There's not a problem with that. It's not so much on the patent issue. What they want, you might not have proven. Just because you have a patent doesn't mean you've proven feasibility of what you're doing. So that's what you're doing with the SBIR. You're proving or demonstrating feasibility of your technology innovation. The patent doesn't do that for you. So.
How much was your return on investment?
How much was the return on investment? Are you asking who? Kumar.
My phase two actually was a construction industry, so the whole construction industry took a dive. So my equipment is stored in the garage right now. So mine is not too good.
That's an interesting question. I don't know how much I saved in terms of dilution, but I would think that 600K probably brought in at least several million, at least. I don't know. I haven't actually done the calculations. From that perspective, it's definitely worth it.
So I think, Kumar, you mentioned that when you were trying to find the right agency to submit to, you found one that was generally doing some stuff in IT and you kind of made it fit. How close do you have to be, whether it's for contracting or for grants without contracts, to get them specified? Or is it okay to be kind of in the ballpark and kind of negotiate with them that it fits?
When you're writing the application itself, how close do you actually have to stick to the problem that the agency is trying to solve?
So I think if you look, there's some that it's very specific what they're looking for, and I'm a software company, right? So it's very obvious it's not going to fit. And in some cases, it's again information technology or software, but it's very specific kind of software, so it didn't make sense. So for me, at least personally, and I think I heard Chuck say the same thing, NSF worked because NSF is much broader. It's not very specific. It's not one of the contracting types. It's a grant. They're actually giving you grants. So it's really about new innovative information, things in information technology as well. That's easy to fit into. So that's what I would look at if you're kind of like me, software and so forth.
Right.
So, changing topic here, talking about that technology futures group, if it's not directly related to R&D, but you need funding for marketing scale, are they government funding or are they TFG, which can help us get funds or loans with respect to that?
So the question is, specifically to Jerry's presentation about Tech Futures Group, if you're doing something in marketing sales, which obviously the grant process does not address, does TFG help in this case?
Yeah, we do help with commercialization and go-to-market strategies. We're advisors, not consultants, so we don't actually do the work for you, but we'll show you how to get the work done. So we do a lot in that area, including partnerships, partnering with a large company to use them as a channel or to get into the market that way.
But no loans or funds.
We do not, no. We do not have any loans or funds. We do not offer space. We're not an accelerator in that sense. We're a group of advisors that act as the advisory wing. So we do advisory services only. That's correct.
So another hand back there, yeah.
There used to be bridge funding after phase 2, and is that replaced with the phase 3, or phase 3 and bridge fundings are different?
There used to be bridge funding after phase 2, going to phase 3. What happened to that?
Yeah, and there is no direct funding in phase 3. We call it phase 3, but there's no money from the government unless like the DoD becomes your customer and they buy it. That's considered phase 3. If you're talking about bridge funding, like the phase 2B I mentioned, that you have to apply for while you're in phase 2, and that's where you have to have a matching investor. So you have to, they match 50 cents on the dollar, for example, up to $1 million. And it could be a private investor, it could be an angel investor. They'll even take like the state funds I mentioned, that counts as match too. So if you get state funding, then you can get that phase 2B funding. And for NSF, it gives you additional 2 years on top of your 2 years for phase 2 for the phase 2B.
And on the phase 1 funding, if you already have angel or venture money, is there an effect on that then?
No, that'd be a positive thing. I think if you want to put in your proposal. So, yeah. Yeah. There's no requirement for matching funds for these programs. You made an interesting comment about not paying yourself and the consultant. Sometimes the strategy people take in phase 1 is to basically over-deliver. So, you have $150,000, but you do $250,000 worth of work. So then you have a better chance of phase 2. So that's a strategy some companies take, but there's no requirement for matching funds.
Question back here again?
So, there was a slide on all these requirements to apply for SBIR types, and I thought they were pretty tough. One of them was the amount of time a company has to be in business before you get all those things. Could you go over that whole process of what is needed and what the qualification requirements are?
So the question is, what are the qualifications to actually apply? How long do you have to be in business or not, et cetera? What else are some of the main criteria?
You don't actually have to be in business when you apply. Like in my case, I was basically a one-person operation. They actually qualify you at the time of award. So all those qualifications, whether you're small business, for-profit, that's at time of award. But then all those things I showed you, you're getting your DUNS number, EI number, and all that. Basically, you're probably going to form either LLC or corporation. So you need to do all that work in advance to apply to. So you do have to basically have your company in place. But when you're putting the proposal together, you don't have to have a company in place. It's at the time of award, you have to have it.
So I just want to add one other thing is that with respect to who can apply and so forth, I noticed that NSF at least makes it a big thing if the company is women run or if women play a significant role. I just noticed there's a table for that. I'll bring that up.
So if you got government funding completely independent of this program, can you still apply for grants? And the second part is that if you get the money from the grant, can you use that as leverage for getting loans?
Yeah, and you could get other funding, like you say non-SBIR funding, like from DARPA for non-SBIR grants. Yeah, that's not a problem. You have to disclose in your application what your other grants are that you're funded through. So you have to disclose that. They want to make sure that you have enough time to work on the grants. So that's not a problem. Yeah, and then I don't think you'd give you any leverage as far as a loan, because they're banks are looking for cash flow and collateral and credit. I don't think SBIR. I don't know. It would help, I guess, give you some credibility, but I don't know if it'd be a big factor or not.
So how broadly do you have to do an RFP search before you apply for this?
And this is really, NIH is real complicated in this area. It's fairly simple with the, NSF, you actually have to specify the topic number. If it's IT 9, whether it's, machine learning or whatever, so you have to specify what the topic is. NIH, there's, I don't know how many institutes within NIH. You can apply, they have what's called omnibus solicitation, which is all the different institutes you apply, and you could suggest which one of the institutes you want to apply to, or they're going to assign you one of those. So it is pretty complicated with NIH, and they also have a separate contracting opportunities too, outside the omnibus one. So it's kind of a complicated answer for NIH. I'd say it's the most complicated one to figure that whole process out.
So how does the 50% actually get measured? If I'm sending some of the work to a development company offshore, is that measured in this 50%, or how does that relate?
Are you referring to 50% ownership, or but the R&D work typically they want it done here in the U.S. So I think you have a tough time doing that. They really want the R&D effort to be done here in the U.S.
Yeah. So the question is, does the government care if the main architect of the software solution is here, but you get people lower cost to actually do the coding elsewhere?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know the answer for sure to that one. It's a little more complicated. When you do get a phase 1 award, they look at the salary rates you propose, so they have to verify that it's reasonable for what, like in my case, I had some CAD designers, so I had to get an AutoCAD survey to show what we pay a typical person. But yeah, I'm not sure I know the answer for sure to that one. That's a good one.
Sure. So the question for Jerry is, what's the role that Tech Features Group plays in developing these application and grant proposals?
And we don't develop the SBIR. We certainly won't write it or that kind of thing. What Chuck will do is help you identify where you might find the appropriate SBIR for what you're looking for, and he will actually review what you've written. So he'll help in terms of giving you some feedback on the review, but he's not going to be writing the proposal at all. So we provide direction. We're more advisors than we are the actual consultants or writers.
Will you guys actually read the proposals and critique it a little bit?
Yes, we will do that. I've done that as an EIR, not for him, but not for an SBIR, but for a very large DoD grant, and helped direct where it was clear and wasn't clear, that kind of thing.
Any more questions? Oh, there are a few more here. Go ahead, John.
How intense or how long does the application process take in order to apply for? How much in advance you should plan for, say, phase 1, phase 2 planning?
So how much time do the different phases actually take to get through the application?
I'd say you need a couple months to start working on it. I mean, you can actually physically write one in a week, and if you've already written one in the past, you could do a lot faster. But your first one, I'd figure a couple months process. I remember writing mine, I was up till midnight for a couple of months in a row writing in phase 1, and also the phase 2 part of it, I was up till midnight for at least a couple of months in a row putting it all together. So it is a lot of work. So.
Kumar, was your phase 2 just as long as your 2-week full-time effort?
Yeah, no, phase 2 was in some ways a little, it was longer because it's a, you have to put in a lot more effort into it, and I think the part where it takes a couple of months is that you have to show like TAM, total available market, serviceable available market, and so you have to do all that kind of research and make sure you do it concisely and put it in, and so that's what took a lot of time. And then, I don't know, I mean, for me though, then I actually spent 2 weeks writing it. And then, so you get a basic thing done, and then the 2 weeks writing is you just keep rewriting it because it's not crisp, it's not crisp, It's just, that's the killer part, if you will. But I would agree with you from the perspective that you need some additional time ahead of time to go ahead and do all the other research, and so you have all the material, all the references, all the, and the other thing I'd like to tell you is that, the competitive section is very important. And, whenever I write these things, I always have this formula in my head that I would say, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. And if you think of it like that, because you got to hit them over the head. Because, when I was in school and I would referee papers, and I realized the ones I liked were the ones that told me what they did, as opposed to me having to figure it out, right? Because that took a lot more effort on my part. And so if you make it very easy for them, you'll see that they'll actually write that back down in their comments. It's pretty much your sentences. So you should think like that. Think how the advisor or the guy who reads it, and how the guy who evaluates it, how is he going to look at it, and how much time is he going to spend on it, and how do you make it easy for them?
Kumar, was it easier to do the grant process or the acquisition process?
One thing about the acquisition process is, no, actually, I'll tell you what, the grant was actually a lot easier in the sense that you could do whatever you wanted. The acquisition, my God, you would not believe it. I had never.
We'll have you come back and talk about that at another time.
One more
Sure.
Kumar's comment. Are there any old SBIR proposals and their critiques and comments available for somebody to review?
Okay, it's like term sheets in college. Are there old ones out there that we can take a look at?
I get asked that question all the time. I have a few I've saved. It's hard to find current ones. We talked about how they can't release information for 5 years, so finding current ones, and you don't want to give the page count and the outline changes. So I have some I could email you. I actually brought along a couple. I've got like my phase 1 and phase 2. I usually share my phase 1 and phase 2 so you can see what a successful one looks like. But it is hard to find them. Some of the agencies post a few on there, but there's not very many. I get that question all the time. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take one maybe one or two more last questions, and then we'll let you guys go. Go ahead.
So when they are writing the grant, what are the things we should avoid?
Good question. So what should you avoid in the grant writing? And maybe another way to expand that question is when applications are rejected for not stupid reasons, but for legitimate reasons. What is it typically rejected for?
Yeah, well, you can get rejected for not following the 1-inch margins, 12-point types. So you can improve your 1 out of 10 to 1 out of 5 by following that. Follow the instructions. Read the solicitation is like 60 pages. So first thing, read the instructions. Thing to avoid is you do need to tell a story. That's the key thing I usually say is tell a story. There's a lot of those I've reviewed and they're written by scientists or someone. After I read them, I have no idea what they're doing or I can't even understand it. So tell the story and don't have it too technical. I know that the Greenwood Consulting Group we've hired to do a lot of full-day proposal writing. They always say you should have your 13-year-old daughter read it, and if they can understand it or something, that's a good sign too. So you don't want to have it too technical, but you need to have it so people can understand it, I would say.
I think the other thing is that, again, I come back to the competition, and I think I like that, you have to tell a story, it's going to be easy to understand. You got to make sure you look at the competition, because especially at NSF, remember, it's going to go to people in your area, and they're going to look at that and say, well, we do this. so that's one. And the other is, even though they don't actually ask for it, put in financials, even for phase 1. Put in the financials so it looks like a full business plan, and I think that makes a difference.
So the facilities and the equipment, how do you use them during the grant?
After the grant.
After the grant, who owns all of these things?
Yeah. Well, technically, in phase one, typically it's hard to get any type of equipment because there's not enough money there. In phase two, for example, I mentioned how we used a 4-axis water jet. So I actually budgeted about $50,000 to do we had a router, the 2-axis router we converted, and then the water jet pump was like $40,000. We ended up buying a used one. I still have that and own that. Technically, though, I guess, I think that whether the government owns that, but a lot of times it stays with the company, but I think I'm not sure the answer to that for all the agencies, whether you can keep that equipment necessarily.
We need to preserve them.
You need to actually preserve them, hold them in posterity, put them in a time capsule, anything like that.
No, not that aware. So that's a good question though.
We have a question in the corner here.
One question, it was mentioned that the PI can only work 20 hours, right, a week. Is that at the time of writing the grant? Or is it in the future when?
Okay, so we have someone here who's planning out exactly how much time they're going to spend on his company. So how much time at the point where you actually have to measure how much time you're spending on the company, is that at the point of grant application or granted?
Yeah, it's a time of grant award. So you could be working full time while you're writing the grant. So it's from that grant award date. So you can wait to quit your job till then. So.
Fantastic. I know most of the entrepreneurs here are probably in the software space, I'm guessing, right? How many are in software? Almost everybody, yeah. So how, and I understand that the grant process, you actually have to apply against a problem or somebody who's actually going to tell you what they want you to do. How is software evaluated in the case of grant writing? I mean, some applications are simple, so is there really a technology risk there? Or are they looking for hard computer science problems to be solved?
I think they're looking for hard computer science problems to be solved. And so, for example, for our Kavisa VDI product, because it was distributed, we focused on this notion of huge scalability and what the fundamental issues of there would be. Now, we knew that we would need maybe 20-25% of that for commercialization, but we put in the full 100 in the report, and I think that was important. And that's what I would do. And then later on, I told them that, hey, as things are going, these 25% is all that we really need, given what we're trying to do. And so here are these. So actually, I actually put together a list of, I forget the exact number, 7 things, and I prioritized them. And then later on I changed that. I said I want to change the prioritization given where it's going and given the kind of commercialization that we're seeing. And again, as Errol would say, okay, go ahead, write that down, put it in a piece of paper that's what you're doing, send that to me, and it's fine. That's how we did it. So make sure, again, especially if it's an NSF, it's a National Science Foundation, guys. And so therefore, it's got to be something interesting and challenging. Otherwise, it's not going to go through.
Okay, last questions. Otherwise, we will, in that case, let us thank the panel. They did a great job. This was extremely informative.